ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Dinozor Gaming, where we learn to be a better player. Today we're going to be taking a look at the Star Wars Unlimited Jump to Lightspeed meta 1 week after the suspended list, where our 3 suspended cards, Jango Fett, Triple Dark Raid, and DJ, were hit. They were terrorizing the meta, being extremely strong and stifling creativity in many other decks. And so with them gone out of the picture, we're going to take a look at which decks, which leaders, or which archetypes benefited the most or lost the most from these changes. Now, it's already been a week. We have some tournament results, of course, as well as a lot of people testing in their locals, testing online. And so here we go. We're going to go over very quickly a list of winners and losers that we find have benefited or lost in this meta, and then we'll go over each archetype one by one right after. So first of all, in the winners, we have so many. It was so hard to pick and choose which ones to name here because of those 3 cunning cards that were very strong. A lot of decks were just not able to compete. And so just to name a few, we have Quinlan, Sabine, Bosk, Anakin, Cad Bane, Gar Saxon, all looking to be extremely strong, as well as some archetypes like blue heroism, blue-green villainy that were being held back from all this really fast, aggressive cunning decks, as well as pilots in general. And as for the decks that lost the most, of course, we have Jango, can no longer be played. Boba 4, the new Boba from Jump to Lightspeed, lost quite a bit. It was really reliant on Triple Dark Raid. Of course, Han, who was directly hit by DJ. However, not all types of Han decks were hit. We'll talk about that very soon. Dooku, and in general more of a separatist package, were very reliant on Triple Dark Raid. While it didn't have any great competitive success, it was still a very strong deck. Same for Piet Yellow, Piet Cunning. It did have some success. It has a top 8 representation. It was also using Triple Dark Raid, so that deck has taken quite a heavy hit. And finally, we have Double Blue or Double Vigilance decks in general, as well as Thrawn, because they were more targeted anti-meta decks that were pretty good into the field. And now that the field has changed, I think they've lost a bit of their share. So let's go ahead and go right in. The main culprits, the main losers, of course, we have Han Solo and Jango Fett. In this case, it's more Han Solo Double Cunning, Double Yellow that got hit. Of course, because they can no longer use DJ. That was one of their strongest plays, and a play that every single deck needed to worry about against Han. But that doesn't mean that the Han deck itself is any weaker. Han has always been a very strong leader ever since set 1, always having some kind of meta relevancy. And yes, getting rid of one of their strongest tools, especially against slower control decks, hurts them, but it's not enough to knock them out of the meta spotlight. Of course, Jango Fett can no longer be played. Not much else to say. Bye. As for collateral damage, we mentioned it earlier. We have Admiral Piet playing with Cunning, Count Dooku, or other separatists, mainly any decks using the new Invisible Hand, very powerful capital ship, and of course Boba Fett. All 3 of these decks relied heavily on Triple Dark Raid. Admiral Piet was able to get out giant 9-10 cost ships by turn 4 or 5. Count Dooku was able to flood the board with an early Invisible Hand from Triple Dark Raid, and Boba Fett, of course, needed that Triple Dark Raid because most of its vehicles that deal indirect damage needed to be played, attack. So just overall, these decks took a hit. That doesn't mean they are unplayable, but they are definitely toned down quite a bit. Next up, we have the anti-meta decks, such as any double vigilance decks. We were seeing somewhat of a rise of Iden Double Blue, for example, which was very strong against Jango and other meta decks, mainly because those decks wanted to interact with the board. And if you are playing double vigilance, you don't have a board to interact with. So that was slowly climbing up the ranks, but not anymore. And of course, we have Thrawn. Thrawn didn't have any huge success, but from what we had seen, Thrawn Red or Thrawn Aggression was kind of shaping up to be a decent anti-meta deck because it had units that it didn't mind dying as much. It was very sacrificial, so it was okay if they were tapped or anything. However, Now that the meta is shifting a lot, I think it took a hit. Its low stats, direct damage, and healing don't play very well in the new big body restore-ish meta. So now, without any further ado, let's go ahead and check out the winners. So, of course, we have the untouched meta decks like Quinlan Voss, usually played with Tarkin Town, but also pretty good in Command, usually with Energy Conversion Lab. Very powerful deck that not only hits your board, but also hits your hand. Very glass cannon, however. Usually they want to win the game by turn 5 or 6. Otherwise, their units start getting smaller compared to most other decks. Of course, there's a few late game cards like Han Solo in their decks, but very fast, aggressive, disruptive deck. It didn't get hit. However, it was mentioned that Tarkin Town, which is the main base that Quinlan uses, is on the watch list. It might get touched later on. We don't know. But at the moment, Quinlan is one of the top decks that was not touched. Then, of course, we have Sabine Wren in a similar boat. One of the only decks right now in the meta that's abusing ECL, Energy Conversion Lab, especially with the likes of Poe and Wrecker. Very fast, very aggressive deck. Has been a contender since set 1. And its worst matchup, Jango, was suspended. So you're going to see a lot more of Sabine. It is the fastest deck in the meta, and it can win games before your opponent is able to do anything. Once again, another very glass cannon deck. Finally, on the complete other end of the spectrum, we have Bosk. Bosk was shaping up to be a good meta deck. Yes, it was good in countering Jango, but Bosk in general is a very adaptable leader that can be played against any meta, and it's another deck that didn't really get touched even after its good showing in the last few tournaments. So yeah, and of course, here we're going to put a little caveat. We have Han Solo here as well. While yes, Han Double Cunning was touched, none of the other Han decks, such as Han Command or Han Aggression, were hit. So I think Han is still a top contender. Next up, we have the Rise of Vigilance Heroism. So Vigilance Heroism got a lot of very strong cards. Heroism in general got a lot of strong cards, but it wasn't able to be showcased due to the strong cunning presence. So the first one we're going to look at is Anakin Skywalker. It was doing fairly decent into the Jango meta, but now it's going to be doing even better. Not necessarily always with Colossus, as we show here. It's a deck that is extremely flexible, extremely adaptable, and it can be played in so many different ways. You could play it low to the ground, a bit like an aggressive deck using Anakin as a finisher. It can be played a bit more mid-range hand disruption-y using force throws and pillages. It can be played more late game, controlling the board until Anakin comes out later on. It has so many different ways to be built and played that you never really know what you're playing against when an Anakin shows up. And that new Colossus deck, while yes, you're having one less card in your hand, while Vigilance Heroism has some of the best draw engines. There is, of course, Yoda, there is Queel, there is Obi-Wan. There are so many ways of drawing a card. There's that new 3/4 space unit that damages itself to draw a card. So that hand disadvantage is not as prevalent. I think Anakin has some of the best matchups this meta, with the exception of perhaps into Quinlan Voss due to the hand disruption aspect of it. But it is definitely going to be one of the more common decks. Next up, we have Yoda. Yoda is the arguably slowest, heaviest vigilance leader on the heroism side. It is fairly similar to Rey and Obi-Wan, which will also have a bit of a success. However, Yoda is just a tad bit better than them for what it's trying to do. Rey comes out a turn earlier, has one more restore, but loses out on so many stats, and on top of that doesn't have a when deployed effect that will defeat a unit. Obi-Wan plays it slightly differently, more defensive in nature, and it was pretty good into the ping meta, especially with Jango running about and Boba Fett's everywhere, but now with those being less important, I think Yoda is just a step above Obi-Wan. And on top of that, Yoda has the flexibility as well to be played with many colors. It's been played with decent success in command. We've seen builds with ECL, we've seen builds with Data Vault doing very well, whether you're abusing Endless Legions, Starhawk, or just playing it to have big stats on board that are hard to deal with. It is going to be one of the strongest decks this meta. And then of course we have Luke Skywalker, which unlike the other two Vigilance leaders that I mentioned, plays it a bit differently. Putting shields on units is extremely strong, and especially now that a lot of the ping decks, the decks that can easily do 1 damage, have been sort of removed from the meta other than Quinlan, Luke is a pretty good contender. We're going to do a little quick mention on Lando Calrissian, very similar to Luke, very similar effect, other than being a pilot, of course. One advantage that Lando has that Luke doesn't is being able to put a shield on units that did not come into play this turn. So if you're playing versus an aggressive deck like Sabine, you can constantly give a shield to the same Sentinel every single turn, creating a roadblock that's very hard for aggro decks to pass. Next, of course, we have blue-green villainy. Arguably the slowest and strongest archetype in the game from the beginning, and anytime the game slows down just a little bit, we see the same face pop right around the corner. It is Palpatine. Emperor Palpatine is the value leader, the leader that has always been the strongest late game leader that we've ever had. Being able to steal a unit from your opponent is an extremely powerful play because it is not only removal, but it is also putting a threat at the same time. On top of that, it has built-in card draw, yes, at the cost of sacrificing your own units, but very often you will have tokens or units that you want destroyed to be able to throw away at your opponent. Very strong leader, was suffering a bit with the fast decks, and in this meta, other than Sabine, I think there is not much that can pose a threat to Emperor Palpatine. We're going to see quite a bit more. We already saw him have a good presence in the last weekend, and it's going to keep getting better and better. Finally, we have the amalgamation of blue villainy leaders, each of them having their own strengths and weaknesses. Kira, Aiden, Krennic, Asajj, all of them are very good mid-range-ish, control-ish decks. Aiden usually played in double blue, but most of them have seen good success in blue-green, in Vigilance Command. They are very good at just slowing down the game until they can put their big threats, and there's no other color that has better big threats than blue-green villainy. You have Darth Vader, you have Snoke, you have Avenger, you have Devastators, you have Relentless. If you make it that late and you haven't taken a lot of base damage, you can just outvalue your opponent to no extent and just win. And of course, we have this set's Admiral Piet, not only necessarily in blue-green, could be played, of course, in Vigilance, could be played in Aggression. Admiral Piet has a lot of potential. We saw him have some good success in all colors, honestly. Maybe Cunning is a bit weaker now without Triple Dark Raid, but Admiral Piet with a slower field, being able to buy himself a bit of time to get those capital ships out, will make him very strong. Arguably one of the only leaders that can match Emperor Palpatine in terms of greed and value, and do it faster. Next up, we're going to look at the leftover villainy cunning decks. These are the decks that are going to take over in terms of cunning villainy. Jango was kind of taking the spotlight from them. The first off, we have Gar Saxon in cunning. Not necessarily using any of these bases, just any cunning base in general. What makes Gar Saxon so strong is that there are so many new units that have shield or other built-in upgrades that can be abused. Just already on turn 1, they can be playing Crafty Smuggler, they can be playing Krennic, and those are all both 3/2 units because of the shield and effect. It is very fast, very aggressive. There are not many cards that can deal with shielded units, of course, depending on which deck you're playing against. If you go up against any kind of red-green deck and a shielded unit comes out, you don't have much recourse. You might be able to play Piercing Shot, sure, but it is a deck that will dish out so much damage faster than you would expect. And of course, Cad Bane. Cad Bane was seeing some relative good success even in the Jango meta. One of the only cunning villainy decks that was not abusing Triple Dark Raid. It is still strong, still good. Could be used with Tarkin Town to either get rid of a turn 1 play because of the ping. Could be played in Vigilance to be a slower control deck. It is good in most of the field, with the only caveat that it usually does get outvalued if you're playing against a heavy control deck. Finally, we're going to take a look at the pilots. Of course, we know that pilots were the main mechanic of this set. However, unfortunately, due to the speed of the meta, many of them did not see play. Some of the pilots, of course, I'm not talking about the units. We've seen that the pilot units themselves have had good success, at least the powerful ones like Chewbacca or Luke Skywalker. But pilot leaders have had decent success, except for the matchups where Jango was able to immediately suspend whatever you attached your pilot leader to. So some of the key ones that we saw, Major Vonreg surprisingly had a pretty good success in some of this past weekend's tournaments. It is the closest thing you will have to a Sabine on the villainy side. It is very fast, very aggressive, knocks out your opponent pretty quickly. And of course we have Wedge Antilles. Everyone thought that Poe would have a bigger share of the meta. However, it looks like Wedge is slowly climbing the ranks. Its speed is unparalleled. There are so many pilots that only cost 1 or 2 to play, so being able to discount that even further makes it so sometimes, even if your opponent is playing a very defensive deck, if they don't have the exact answer to your turn 2 Millennium Falcon, well, on turn 3 you might be hitting their face for 13 or 14, and that is very hard to come back from. And of course, Darth Vader. Darth Vader is a deck that a lot of people have been trying and wanting to make work. Well, it looks like he's doing pretty well right now. Of course, he's still vulnerable to upgrade removal, but the deck itself is so swarmy, so not necessarily fast, but just is able to take over the board with so many units, whether you're playing him in double command with Unity of Purpose or playing him in Vigilance to get those bigger ships, maybe even put him on a grid ship. Darth Vader is looking to be a very, very decent leader this set. Okay, and that was it for today's overview. We're going to keep it short and sweet. What do you think is going to be the top meta decks right now? What are your meta predictions? What are your thoughts? Do you think I'm wrong in anything? Honestly, it is hard to argue that the top decks right now will not be Sabine, Quinlan, Anakin, maybe even Han. But everyone's hoping to be proven wrong. We're hoping that the meta is diverse enough. At least from what we've seen this past weekend, there is quite a bit of diversity, which is good, which is what we wanted to see after the suspensions. So I would love to hear your thoughts. Please feel free to leave a comment below. And that's it from me. Thank you for listening, everybody. See you next time.